All right, we are back, and it's our 60th episode since the rebrands. I always like to say that, so like asterisk, sort of. Our 60th episode, and we just finished quarterly planning, so kind of like 60th episode, going into Q3. Ashley got home from our flight at 4 a.m., so she's alive, alert, and ready to go, as always. In sort of thinking about our 60th episode, my question for you in 60 seconds. So Ashley, 60 seconds. This is, quite a
60 seconds with a slow brain, like no shot, but go ahead.
Okay. In 60 seconds, when we were like talking about starting a podcast in sort of this format, what were your like thoughts on it? What were you excited about? What did you think about it?
Sure. I mean, honestly, from a like a personal standpoint, because I feel like I deliver information and I deliver what's in my brain best verbally. So, I mean, I think what I was most excited about was just to like, for myself, just like be who I am, just express things the way I want to express them, say things the way I want to say them, talk about the complexities of what we do. When you say to me like, oh, write a thread on X, I had to sit there like, with my hands frozen on the keyboard for 8 hours to produce 4 sentences, you know? But then you jump on a podcast and it can just roll. So I think for me, the idea of a podcast has always been exciting, even going back to the Redefine the Circle days, because it's just personally where I feel like I can just really connect my brain to my mouth best and be able to really share what we do, what we're thinking about, the like holistic nature of OGX, the totality of the things that we're working on. And so I love this platform for that reason. And I just think it's great because I think it's a great opportunity for people to like hear so much information, so much meat all in one space and just like do it from their car or do it just like as they're going about their day. So I just think the nature of podcasts are great, but for me personally, it just really like fits how I best express myself, I'd say.
All right, Laura, same question.
Oh, good one. I think for me, I was like, cool. We get the opportunity, like, you know, the three of us with guests or whatever to like, I don't know, let the world see some of our like internal conversation and the way that we talk about the business and the game and, you know, player development in general. And I was like, I think that'll be fun, you know, because obviously I enjoy, you know, our conversations. And I think I think one of my favorite things is when someone's like, oh yeah, I've got a road trip and I've got the OGX podcast just like queued up. I'm like, people I think really enjoy, I enjoy podcasts. I like the listening component. I'm a multitasker. And so I just like the like diversity of the way we deliver this information. And I think like, it's just been like just a fun experience for us every week that when we are sort of like elbow deep in the business to be able to talk about the game and to talk about it from our lens. And I like this every week. It's a blast.
Yeah. It's fun. Okay. Our topic today is I think that this is like a fitting time because we obviously have been really hard at work with Driveline and building out the reports that are coming from the launch pads, this higher level of sort of markerless motion capture, relying on a lot of the information that we already had about pitching and hitting from the sample standpoint and building these reports that are coming out of that to really give like very clear information out of the biomechanics. So I think it's fitting in that. And we've had conversations lately. I actually was thinking of like a line I use when I'm explaining our biomechanics assessment to someone who's considering coming. I'll lay out like, okay, we measure this, you go with this, and here's all the things we measure. And then I was like, and all of that's kind of irrelevant because the most important part is that then we deliver that information to you in a report and in a way that's super actionable, that gives you clear guidance on kind of where to go in this snapshot of time and sort of what to target and make sure we're targeting the right things. And I think what we have seen both in our own journey and also still kind of out there in the game is that sometimes what we are pushing as a community or as a different companies or things is just the data collection piece. And what we are often finding is that our conversations are around like that. It's great. We need data. So it's not to say people shouldn't be collecting data, like having in-game data at the start before you maybe even knew what it was, or having ball flight data before you knew it was, or biomechanics data. Like you have to have data collection, which I'm sure we're going to get into plenty with this conversation. But this idea that the product for the athlete is the data collection is, I think getting misunderstood, or even Laura, maybe, this is to some of the conversations you've had when a a school talks to us about their sports science department, like we're going to take our athletes to our sports science department. And it's like, you can both be excited for that because it's some data for that sports science. It's softball. It's really exciting. And also I think for us, we're always like to the coach, what's your expectation of what you're going to get out of that? Because
And
that
then
sports
what?
science department, right. That sports science, it's one thing for the sports science department. It doesn't mean it's bad that they're doing that. But the likelihood that you as the coach are going to get something
be
actionable
really
out of
clear.
that.
What will come out, Laura? What will come out if the school just goes to their sports science department and runs through their like lab setup, whatever they determine that lab setup is? Literally, what will come out of that?
It's a great question. The number of scenarios that I've had, or I've had a consulting call, or whether it's a player development person who's related to the softball team, or it's with someone in the sports science lab, the disconnect is always the sports science lab will often serve the entire athletics community or even the entire university. It could be, a lab that's like baked in the academic side. It could be something more sports science that's the athletic side. It can be a mix. But the challenge is always, the coach will say, we know data is important and we have these resources on campus, and they'll make the connection obviously with, the sports science side or that, particular lab. And the lab will say, okay, well, what do you want to see? And the coach is like, well, don't you tell us? Don't you tell us what it is that you want to see? And so the disconnect is like the sports science lab is general, right? It serves multiple teams, multiple athletes. The likelihood, and I could be misspeaking, but the likelihood of like really softball or any sport specific stuff is probably limited without the team, the coach, someone coming in and saying, we need this, this, and this. Can you deliver that? And being very clear about that. Otherwise, that lab mechanism is really for general, things that serve the general athlete population or are from a research standpoint. And so it's not that like the equipment or the intent is bad or wrong or whatever. It's just that there's no communication or standard or knowledge of like, what are we getting out of this process? The coach is like, I know it's important. This is valuable. Tell me what it is. And the sports science lab is going, but we don't know your sport, right? And that is where, then I usually am that bridge of like, okay, then what we think is XYZ, let's start with an assessment. We can bring, you can bring us out and have a sense of like, what is it that you guys collect, and have a place to start. It's not that every data point we collect is perfect, but it's a place to start and to at least be educated about how our data points work together, because that's really the conversation you have to take back to the sports science lab or the academic lab. It's like the coach or the team or the player development person, whoever it is, they have to guide what you're asking for from those people. And that's the barrier, in my opinion. And so oftentimes my conversations are usually with a player development staff member is like, here, let's just start somewhere. What's important to you? What are the questions that you're interested in? What are the questions your coach is interested in? And I'll be honest, I don't see a lot of successful partnerships in that way. And I think it's just tricky. It's not a lab built specific to softball,
Right.
And
Well,
so
and there's also like, even I was thinking as you were saying that, like, what questions do you want to go? It's like, well, how did those people know what question? And even if they're like, I'm interested in whether or not her hands are dropping, it's like, well, what we have found is that's never how we have not been able to, or have been very careful not to go into sort of the initial data collection, the building of the report and the building of the norms with that level of subjectivity or sort of bias to what we were looking for. It's more just starting to understand what generally does it look like for everyone, and then learning over time with tons and tons of data of what matters and what you can influence and different things. And so it's also like, I have a college program, or I have this one piece of data, or I have whatever, and I am going to then base decisions off these 5 people I collected. It's probably it's not a good way to go about it. And so it's, for us, the report, the softball report that we've gotten to at this point has taken us over 5 years of data to get to the place where it is. We could tell the story because we saw it so much early on. So the first few years, we saw hundreds of pitchers and hundreds of hitters, and we could start to see what what made sense and what was important, and we could tie that to training. That was a really powerful piece for us of like, we think this is important, then we tried to influence it and whether it worked or not. And we did that a lot, but it took us 5 years of data to get to a place where we're like, this is important, and these are the like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that are the most important, and they're going to have the most influence on XYZ, and here's how you look at it. And there's just, you can't, there's not many other like systems
I was
where you can
gonna
do that.
say, Laura, it's very obvious that you started your world in academia, because that was very diplomatic and professional in response.
Thank you very much.
Because what my response would have been and is going to be is the answer.
My answer.
You can't get shit from that process.
I was gonna say, my answer
is the answer.
My true answer, Ashley, is like, you get frustration. That's it. You get time loss and frustration.
Shit. I mean, you can't get anything of value as a coach or anything that's applicable. And I think that's the actual answer. So very professional and diplomatic, Laura. That's one of the things I love about you is your light switch on and off. But with the real answer is that you can't get anything from that. And there's just a reality to that. I often think when people are like, you know, I think sometimes there's like a social media world, because social media is all built off of like what's sexy. And if something is sexy on social media, everyone's like, that must be cool. I always think to myself, like, I wish I was in a room. Like, how about we get in a room with the people that are collecting that data? I'd just be curious to like ask them some questions, and maybe they're doing some great things, but I'm always really curious of like, does it go beyond the like social media world? And the answer is probably no, right?
Well, and I think a big asterisk that this conversation is specific to softball in the sense that there are labs out there. There are academic labs. There are labs out there in a sport where enough data has been collected and there is the ability to license a report that is helpful to deliver information that can deliver it. What I will say is it doesn't, I think for a while we were like, oh, well, in softball pitching, that's, you know, we know that doesn't exist for softball pitching, but maybe it does for softball hitting. What I will say, and we've talked about this a little bit on some other episodes in conversation, is that in our process of building out and sort of elaborating our hitting report with Driveline and sort of some of the work they've done with baseball, is that not wholesale sweeping, like nothing applies and softball is totally different, but there are differences in the norms and the understanding in the softball report. So even in hitting where maybe, and I think there's not actually that many labs doing hitting data because it's so hard for the setup in an academic lab. So, but even if there's an ability to license a hitting report, but if you are using baseball norms, what we have seen is like that you are probably delivering some inaccurate information, because we are seeing that the softball swing in some nuances are really important. When we're talking about the things that matter in biomechanics, you know, timing matters, sort of posture matters. And it's like, okay, you could say in baseball, like we hinge, we side bend, we hold posture. Like generally the concepts are all the same. We counter rotate in the swing. We know all of these things. But what we are seeing is like the amount you do that is different because of the timing you have and the ball path you have. And so that really matters to the story, because it's not just about that you do the things. It's the range that you do those things, the timing that you do those things. And all of that is a little different in softball. So I think also as an asterisk to be clear, there are places you can go into an academic setting and you can get a report that is based off of a data set that is very large and that delivers a meaningful product to you. And I think probably there are many baseball programs that in some ways have had the benefit of some of those, although I don't think there's that many, and I don't think it's that easy to get into the lab, and there's limitations there, but that exists, but that doesn't exist in softball. So that's been our thing, is that then people are like, oh, great, now softball has this lab and it has this and it has that. It's like, sort of. Like big asterisk, what is the output that you're getting? Like, yes, we can start collecting information. Yes, it's exciting that programs want to collect the information now. It's like great for our sport. And also, I am a coach. I needed something actionable out of this. I am an athlete. I need something actionable out of this.
Also, if it was just as simple as collecting the data, why would we have a partnership with Driveline? So basically what they could do in the hitting space, they are like, we already know, we've done this work, we've collected enough, we've seen the norms. The norms mean it shows you the range that people are in, whether it's posture, speed, rotation, whatever position is, what is typical. And then when someone's out of that typical range, right? They know that. They could just say, hey, we're going to collect, like whatever it is, 500 hitters in softball, and then get those ranges and we have the same report. They could do that, right? And so really the main piece of this is that they're like, one, they want us to advise on that, obviously, and they want us to be like, because we're, the brand in the space. But on the pitching side, they could never do that, because if they could, they wouldn't come to us, right? If they could just like, we have the equipment, we have everything we need to collect the data, but they're like, we don't even know what we would be asking to look at. Of course we could get there, but it will take years, right? And we've got the data collection system, we've got the ability to visualize a report, but it will take years to get enough data to ask the question. And the reality is we've already done that work. So for us, we started with doing sensors, which are definitely a lower level of wearable sensors, of a lower level of biomechanics collection, but it's what we had access to. It's field friendly. And we just started getting norms, right? Of like, okay, when using sensors, right? Not comparing to like inside of the lab, force plates, et cetera. When using sensors, we started to get norms. And when we started to get norms, and it was manual as hell, and it took forever, and it probably took 2 years, 3 years maybe.
Easily, yeah.
And now we started to be able to tell people when you were out of range based on those sensors. Then the next step for us is that our partnership with UNO, the University of Nebraska Omaha, and their marker lab with force plates. So the first thing that we did was, okay, let's get some athletes on the sensors and in your UNO lab and start to understand what are the norms, what are the differences.
Right. Well, and the same thing applies for UNO. Is if it was as easy as just collecting the data,
why would they come to us?
Wouldn't come to us. They would have
Right.
collected the data.
And so we went in with two pieces with UNO. One, what's the language between sensors and the marker, right? Like how do they speak to each other and what's the differences? Two, we opened up what we looked at, right? Because we're like, all we're able to look at on the sensors is X, Y, and Z. But now that we have the marker data and the force plate data, we can look at everything. So then we opened up all of these variables to now tell us what else should we be considering and looking at that matters. So then we got to that phase. And then now that puts us in position that when Driveline came to us, we knew the variables. It was not, we knew like you want to look at this, in this time frame, doing this and this, not because it's a guess. And so what you're saying, Laura, is like when they're like, well, what do you want to look at? It's a guess of what you think matters. Yeah. But we started with the guesses like maybe 7 years ago. And so now we're so much further along with knowing like, it's not a guess what we're looking at. And that's why we were able to collect data in Driveline and within 2 months create an incredible report with them. It's because we did that work already. And they're like, we're not doing all that work. It's years worth of not data collection, data collection. They could do the data collection in a weekend if they really wanted, right? So it's not the data collection. It's not even it's really understanding all the variables you should be looking at in the timing you should be looking at them, what matters, how this variable ends up linking to what the arm is doing, how that matters. And so that's the work we have done. That's the power of what we do. And because of that, and that journey in sensors, manually figuring out our own norms into the UNO lab, now into the marker data, that's the power. So I think, I don't mean to sit here and be like, I don't know, like shit on everybody who's out there trying to collect biomechanics data, but I'm kind of like, good luck. And honestly, if you feel like you've got something good, I'd love to get in a room with you because
Absolutely.
we this is the kind of stuff that we're elbow deep in it every single day. And it's been years and years and years. So I do get a little bit charged because in all things life, as most people do, I like substance and authenticity and the like flashy, sexy social media look at our lab. I'm like, oh, give me a break, because I hate to be cynical, but I kind of know like that's an Instagram post, the substance of that. And I think the challenge of it is that the customer, the person getting that product, they don't freaking know. Right? They don't know. But even when we're talking ball flight, like in this conversation, we're kind of talking about biomechanics data, of course, but it happens with ball flight. We have so many athletes that we work with at OGX. They're remote athletes, so they don't maybe even have access to data all the time. They'll like, I went to this camp at a school, or I went to a camp that's with a private entity or whatever that looks like. Here's the report I got. Can you help me understand it? And I'm like, sure. And honestly, this came up last week and I was like, this is terrible. This is a terrible report. They collected all the data. I think I think they got yak data. So it was just like, we look at yak data all the time, but what they chose to show them was just, I'm like, you can't get anything out of this. Let me explain why. Let me tell you why this is like, there's probably 10 things you could have gotten out of this. And they showed you like 0.3 of the things that mattered, So I was like, this is not a good report. This is just a bad visual of the actual data they collected. And so but they didn't know that. And they're OGX people, right? But they were like, what, was this good or was this bad? I'm like, no clue based on what they're showing you here, you know?
Your point, Ash, I think it's, we, to clarify, there's sort of two approaches we take in the way that we communicate the story. And it's something we've worked really, really hard on with the pitching side, is like, you've got the individual story, right? You have the individual story of her timing, you know, how fast she's moving, all the parameters about how she organizes the motion. That's one part of the story. And what you just said is like, is this good or bad? That's against the norms. And there are times and this is why volume of data collection is so important, is that you need to test when someone violates your norms, basically. Is it important? Does that matter? And does that mean that that norm is right? Because you're not just asking the question, is your data against the norm good or bad? Are the norms good or bad, right? So what we have found so far, at least in the kinematics, is like, the load phase is highly variable. It's really hard to find, you know, this like consistency amongst the load, amongst all the pitchers that we've had so far. And that's okay. We just have to be careful then about how we interpret if someone is out of range in the load phase. You got to keep looking down the chain, because you have to know if that thing that was out of a norm way back here in the beginning of the motion, does that matter at the end of the motion? It might not. Maybe she compensates and it's irrelevant. But it's not just about, I think this is something, a transition that I see with our evolution with the volume we've got right now with the driveline partnership and the markerless data. This evolution I see is like, we have been able to stop sort of talking about data just at certain events, just at certain points in each of the motions. And now we are talking about these continuous graphs and the relationship maybe of like shoulder and elbow or trunk and arm positioning. And we're talking about how these things interact and intersect with each other. It's not just, okay, at max this or your peak whatever was this. It's not at a discrete point. It's talking about the entirety of the motion. And that's taken us, as we've said, years to get to, because in the beginning it was just the sensor data that has some limited application because of the numbers of sensors we had. And so there's two parts of it. There's the individual story that has to be told connected to ball flight. I mean, I don't know that you can have any conversation about biomechanics that's meaningful unless it is connected to an endpoint. It's connected to some performance data. So either it's hit tracks or, you know, whatever it is from a skill standpoint. And then you have to then give the perception of like, well, is this good or bad? Is this in range or out of range? And that's a different conversation. And so we have two parts of our reporting. It's like, what's your individual story? And then how do you match up against other people who maybe we've talked about like a velo tier above. I think we're not going that direction, but we've talked about how we bucket these athletes and these norms to give this concept of like, this is where you stack up against other people, but it's who they stack up against that is difficult. It's difficult to decide that. So it's an individual story, and there's
also, you know what I was going to say? There's also this world of like in academia, oftentimes when there are conferences, this happens like at NFCA, and there's like a pitching biomechanics and everyone's like, woo, I want to know about that, right? But it's very academic based. And academia, as you know, Laura, is about publications. It's about the correlation between certain variables. Does this correlate to this? Like it's this and that's for a research paper, right? That is answering a specific research question, the influence or the correlation, the connectivity of certain variables to another. That is a entirely different world. Like we're not here to shit on that world. That's just publication world. That is an entirely different world than measuring someone's biomechanics for the sake of practical application in the bullpen and training. I mean, literally on two different planets. So I think what often people get wrong is when they're like, oh, we're doing this like panel of biomechanists or we're getting whatever. And it's academic based, which is great, except coaches, you might as well stand up there and speak a language that coaches literally do not speak, because that's not going to help them. It doesn't mean the research is bad. It doesn't mean the process of collection was bad.
Right. Well, it's great. It's what we said. It's exciting and great to have research.
Yeah, sure.
Our partnership with UNO is two-sided, right? All that data that goes feeds their
publications,
grad assistants and their things to do research, and getting research publications out about softball pitching, for instance, is amazing. And we want that to happen, and it should be happening. It's really exciting. And also where I was going, Laura, based on yours, and this is related to this concept, is let's even say that I'm going to go and I'm just going to get a biomechanics report, or I'm going to go and I'm just going to get ball flight. Like I'm going to go and I'm going to get one piece of this puzzle, right? And I can go to X place and I can get this information, and I have that. Maybe that in and of itself is not the negative. It's, you know, we tie everything together, and that's how we've kind of got to what's important. I think that's what it is in biomechanics, is by tying together how that influences ball path. I mean, in ball flight, in both hitting and pitching. So maybe we could, at this point, deliver a biomechanics report without the ball flight and say, like, okay, here's some things. I think what is important, though, is we are talking about data and sort of the understanding of data in this like snapshot assessment concept. I'm going to go get the snapshot of me. And what then the carryover that's really important, and why, Ashley, you're saying it needs to be applicable in the bullpen, it needs to be all these things, is how am I going to know if I took this information and it says I'm out of the norm in this time period, and that does influence XYZ. It's making my arm come in slower, it's making my back come in slower, it's affecting my bat path. How am I going to know if I am fixing that? Am I going to look? Am my bat path going to be fixed? Am I going to, whatever those things are? And we just had this conversation yesterday, because at the end of the day, like we have college kids right now training, and they're sending me video and they're coming in. I'm not always in. They're like sending things. And I gave a story that this kid one time, like I could look at her video still and I could say like, nope, we didn't do enough. Your path still doesn't look perfect. You know, like we gotta fix more of this, you know, the mechanics. Except she hit one day and turned around and was like, was that better? And I said, well, it was a 79-mile-per-hour home run off the machine. So that's the highest exit velocity you've hit yet this summer, and the furthest ball you've hit. So I think it was better. Like
seems good.
And there's right. And so there's a level of then the understanding of, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to we might do another biomechanics assessment in a few, 12 weeks or whatever it is, to kind of see what the snapshot is then and get hyper focused on the right training again. But it's this understanding, and I think, where you get sometimes when your whole thing is just the assessment or just the biomechanics, or you're just this piece, is where our process has started intertwining, is understanding what are we even trying to influence, and then is the training that they go doing that, and what are we watching. We don't put them in the, maybe eventually at a college that will be able to tweak mechanics this way and put them in the lab more frequently, but we don't put teenagers in a lab every week and just keep trying to perfect their mechanics. It's like, here's your snapshot right now. This is the training program we know has influenced that in the past. And then what we are determining whether it's getting better or not is performance. This is the way we think it's going to influence performance, and is it doing that or not? And you can't, I think that's the piece, is, all of that back and forth and understanding ultimately, as you're saying, Ashley, the reason we are measuring these things, the reason we want this information is rooted in influencing sometimes injury prevention and performance. And that is it. It's not just because it's fun to research things. We are gathering that information and trying to deliver a report that is hyper focused on that. And that takes a long time to get to, because it took this back and forth. It took a lot of data, and it's still evolving. We said, like, we still are going to continue to get new pieces of information.
Sure, right.
3 years ago, we were like, no one can throw backspin. And now every single pitcher we taught to throw backspin, because we learned that. So now that's not a true statement anymore. So we learned how you throw backspin and what that looks like has changed and evolved, and our understanding of that has evolved. And things like that are always going to happen. 5 years ago, we were like 70 miles per hour exit velocity. Woohoo, that's amazing. And now it's like, well, everyone's stronger, the bats are hotter, and now 80 is the threshold. And we have kids almost saying 90 now. So things are constantly evolving and changing, because the game is changing and training is changing, and all of these things are changing. So the reports are going to continue changing. But that's really, I think, where our hesitation has come from. It's twofold. It's, do you have the information and volume of data to even deliver something helpful? Because just getting the data and saying, like, here you go, is not helpful in a variety of ways. One, sort of at best, it's like, what does this mean? What am I going to do with it? And at worst, as a more hot asterisk, is that sometimes you then miss bad data because you don't understand the data. And now you hand over something that is bad data to someone. And that's like the worst case scenario. So,
and also your question, Krista, of like, do you have The answer is no. I think the reason why I get charged, one, I'm low on sleep today, so then I'm extra feisty. Two, because I hate when shit is not rooted in substance and it gets sold to somebody, right? I can't stand that concept. And so the reality is, if you are looking for biomechanics information that is going to directly impact performance, training, your plan, your player development, if it is not a lab data report that is connected to us, I don't buy it. Because, and if I am wrong about that, maybe I am, then I'd love to sit in a room with the people who think that that's not true and see what they've got, and I'd love to be proved wrong. But I just know what the process has looked like and what it's taken to get to this point, to know, again, not to just collect data, not to just create a research question, create a publication. But I am talking about, for what we said, the ability to collect the data, have something really, really clear to deliver to the athlete that's like, okay, this is what you need to go after right here. Not this and not this, but this. And if you do that, this is what we should see on the ball. If you think there is a product out there from someone else, we have to get in a room with those people, because I would love the conversation, is how I feel when I think about that. Because there isn't. There isn't. That path runs through OGX, which is what I'm so proud of us for. And so I think that's why I get really charged. It's just like, don't buy that. Don't do that. That is just it's either something that's not going to help you and it's just for their research purpose, or it's a gimmick. It's probably one of those sides. So anyway, I think that's the reason why these types of things sort of charge me a little bit, is because everybody can make something look real good on social media. But the reality is, people should know what substance looks like, what it means for something to be of value. And this is not just me being like, oh, I think we're the best. No, we are.
Well, here's a perfect example, I think, and maybe we can end on this, which I think is tied to a little bit more of where we see this limitation in ourselves and we are cautious about it. It's force plate data. So I think, like, we saw years ago, force plate data came out from hitting, and they were like, good, bad, this, you're putting so much force into the ground. And even then I was like, how do we know this is good and bad? Like, you're taking a good hitter and then you're saying it's good that they do this, they put this force in the ground. It's like, that's not really how it works. And so with UNO, we've been collecting force plate data for pitching, and we don't report on it yet because we don't know what it means. And I think that's the reality. It doesn't mean it's bad to do that. And I was going to say, and if someone says, hey, we got this lab and we're like, we need to start collecting data for the good of the game, go get in the lab. Like, you're not going to get a product out of it, but that's fine. I mean, do those things. We've needed people to do those things all along the way. So I think, go give to the game and the research and things. But from a product standpoint, like, we are closer now because of the volume of data that we've collected to seeing what matters and what we want to report on. But you can't just, even though the very first pitcher that ever walked in UNO was on force plates, we couldn't just say, like, see how much force you put into the ground here, and because you throw hard, that's good. That's not real. That's not how it works. So it's, how long have we been collecting data at UNO now? 3 years? 4 years?
Almost 2.5. I'd say the force plates, we probably had about 1.5 years or so of full data collection with full motion capture and force plates.
Right. And so it's like, we're not even in a place after that long. So it's still, we still want to post, like, this is amazing, we're getting force plate data, this is so exciting, we're getting the full motion, we're getting all these things. And also from a product standpoint, and the information and the story and how much what ties or what you're going for, or how important that is to performance or whatever, we don't know yet, because we don't have enough data and we don't have the norms and we haven't looked at it or been able to ask the questions yet at the volume, and we're getting closer to that. But that, I think, is an example of that will evolve our data when we get to that and we understand how that matters, and it will change things. But you can't just because you collect it, you can't just say this is important. And you can't just say this kid throws 70 and she puts a ton of force into the ground, so
that's what we should be doing. Right.
You can't do those things. It takes time.
Oh, sure, you
background,
can.
And so, well, you can. Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, sure you can.
And so that's kind of the story, I think, of just being like the questions of asking of these places when you're going, and it's the same for ball flight. It's the exact same for ball flight, which is like, once upon a time, 4 years ago, everyone was like, it's the very first time we ever got exit velocity with pocket radars. And we thought it was like amazing. We were doing it, everyone's getting off the tee. And so then they were like, this is a good hitter because she hits 70 and it's a kid swinging off the tee. And so even that, it's like, we delivered, you went to camps and data collection things, and they measured, your exit velocity off a tee. And so it's like, that's not good. That doesn't tell us anything. That's not a real measurement of whether a hitter is good or not. It's a power expression, but that's not measuring anything. And so even in ball flight, it's like, if you don't understand sort of like what is good, and you don't have the volume of hitters to say whether that's good or bad in the context of the skill, it just doesn't mean a lot. And so that's kind of, I think, a good example of something we've withheld and not shared as part of the story, or not made any sort of conclusions on, because we're not at a place where we can do that yet. And so I think we just have to get to that place. And that's kind of what you're saying, Ash, is that, you know, if you don't have that volume and that understanding, and you haven't seen what matters and how it interacts with things, then just delivering the data to someone is like, okay, what am I gonna do with this?
Yeah, and
that's
borderline irresponsible.
Well, that's as I say, that's the best case scenario. Someone just hands you the information and you don't know what to do with it. The worst case scenario, we've seen this in plenty of cases, even with some of the like field friendly data, is that when they then interpret it without that data and say like good, bad, based on the three informations I've had, that's where it gets like, okay, now we're starting to get into sort of dangerous is probably pushing it, but into a category where you're taking this information, you're telling them it's objective, and it's definitely subjective, and you're sending them in a path that's not going to be good.
In summary, again, if you are interested in getting your biomechanics legitimately measured and given back to you in a way that is related to your performance goals and how training will connect to that and what even matters in your motion, and just because something looks odd doesn't necessarily mean that's something we need to chase. If you want clarity on that story in a way that's legitimately going to help with training, I know exactly where you should go. So you can book your assessment with us.
Five places now, right? So we got Romeoville, Omaha, Seattle, Phoenix, Tampa. Any of those places?
Not all of those. Not all of those for pitching. So So Arizona and Seattle not pitching yet, but hopefully soon. But at least Tampa, Omaha, and then Chicago are three places where if it's not our own OGX facility, it is our process and our reporting and our debriefing, which is what really matters.
Yeah. All right. See you there.
OGX Nation! We love you. We appreciate you. But we'd love you even more if you would like, subscribe to this podcast, give us reviews, send us comments on what you want to hear. Then we'd really, really love you. Got to do it. Do it.